already opened with a karakia before the briefings. So I'm now going to move that the apologies be noted, and we have apologies from Rajan and Julia Nene, and I think we have one from Jonathan Mason as well. Right, okay. So I'll move that those apologies be noted. Perhaps I could ask Dawn to second that, please. Thank you. Okay, now now disclosures of interest by members. I'd like to draw members' attention to the conflicts of interest policy and ask that anybody that needs to disclose any interest in any of the items on the agenda would do so now, please. So Kath and Hala, you're both raising your hands.
So current family members and future family members studying at the university.
Thank you. Hala?
I am currently studying at the university.
Great. Anybody else? Obviously, that is one of the main papers we will be considering today. Is there anybody else who has a conflict in respect of that?
No, I've paid the last of my Auckland University fees at the beginning of the year.
Oh, well, congratulations. I take it, congratulations, not that you've stopped paying Auckland University, congratulations that I take it that means that your child is no longer is no longer attending university.
Graduates on the 12th, but I've paid up, so I don't think I have a conflict.
Oh, excellent, excellent, excellent. No intention to pay any fees next year. Very good. All right. Well, I will move that those disclosures be noted, and with that disclosure, I think we're comfortable having you as part of the council meeting, and I'm going to ask Kathy to second that, please. Thank you. All right. So now, in terms of conferment of degrees, we have a number of degrees that need to be conferred. So by the authority vested in me by resolution of the University of Auckland Council, I, Cecilia Tarrant, Chancellor, confer the degrees stated upon those who, within their several faculties, have satisfied the requirements of this university. All right, now we'll move on to the next matter of business, which is the minutes. We have the minutes from Part A from the last meeting of the 21st of August. We'll take those minutes as read. And are there any comments on those minutes from anyone? Okay, if there are, Jan?
Sorry, really minor point on page 11 under the report of Senate. I think where it says this item was presented by Pro Vice Chancellor Education Professor Cole, she drew Senate's attention to the following. This probably should be Council's attention. Sorry, Wendy,
yes.
I should have emailed you.
Yeah, no, good catch. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, very good catch. Okay. Right, so with that change, if there are no other comments to the minutes, I will move that the minutes be taken as confirmed, and I'll ask Jan to second that. Thank you very much. Now, matters arising, not elsewhere. We've got a note here about the Knowledge Equity Network, and we understand that there will be an update provided to the council in the December meeting. Okay, thank you. So now we'll move to the Vice-Chancellor's report.
Kia ora, thank you, Chancellor, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll take the report as read as usual, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on that report. But as I always do, I'll just supplement with a few additional comments since the report was submitted. So I won't talk too much about the Senate review because that will come up as part of our item under the Senate. I do want to congratulate everybody who was engaged and involved in the award of the posthumous degree at the weekend in the Fale. It was a wonderful ceremony, and it was, of course, the second ceremony in a series of 3, and we have the third one coming up very soon, but it was a really well attended event. And I really want to acknowledge our Tongan students who did fantastically well with both dance and celebration on Saturday. So congratulations to everyone involved in that. You will, of course, been aware of a number of things that I've been talking about recently. We've just initiated the refresh of Tau Matatate, the strategy. So the vision goes until 2030. The strategy is a 5-year strategy and it runs into 4 years now. So we'll be starting to look at that strategy and understand over the next 3-year cycle what we need to do in order to really accelerate elements of that, including the curriculum transformation, but also, of course, enhancing the support for the research centres and institutes that we've built into that programme, along with the engagement strategy and supporting the learner success plan. You will, I know that council's aware of this, but you will have seen that the students held a protest on campus quite recently, just over a week ago, last Friday, around student accommodation and costs associated with that. I was really pleased that the students really conducted a very well maintained protest, and we had visitors from a number of parliamentary parties, and I have to say that I think the students and the university worked really together in order to execute the students' right to protest during that afternoon. In addition to that, I received a letter from the Free Speech Union. This was in relation to an engagement strategy that has been put in place through the science faculty. So the science faculty have really pleasingly decided that they're going to run a series of dialogues in the science faculty and set that engagement plan in place. And the Free Speech Union wrote to me about that, not really understanding what that process was about. And so I've spoken to the Dean of Science and we've responded to that letter, and the Dean of Science has been engaged in responding to that letter, given that it's actually led through the science faculty. I attended the University's New Zealand Vice-Chancellor's meeting on Thursday last week. And of course, as you will understand, lots of focus on briefings to incoming ministers. That's a bit on hold at the moment for obvious reasons, but really also trying to understand what the higher education review might look like in the future. And of course, 2 key areas for us there, not just thinking about the future funding for higher education, but also the size and shape of it as a nation. We are aware that there's going to be a collaboration fund made available from the government for the universities to work together to support some of those areas where we're already collaborating, such as languages. So we're involved in working with a number of universities around creating a language centre, so nationally trying to make sure we don't lose that capacity and capability. And education is another area where we're doing that, and there'll be opportunities to think more about that as well. I think I'll leave it there. There's plenty more I could talk about in response to the report. Lots of very exciting things happening, and most recently engaged in the India Business Summit, which of course is also leading to some further engagement in February, where we'll be hosting the QS India Summit in Chennai. Happy to take questions, Chancellor.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there questions for the Vice-Chancellor on her report?
I've got one. Thanks, Cecilia. The Times Higher Education, it's really good that we stayed at 150, or we're at 150. But the fact that they've changed the analysis to now 18 performance indicators. A little while ago, we did a project to look at what the indicators were and how we could specifically target our activities to make sure that we were best that we could be in each of the categories. I presume that we'll do the similar exercise with the additional 5 performance indicators. I think it'd be quite useful to come back to council and say, here's the 18 and here's how we're targeting our efforts towards each of the new ones and the existing ones.
Thanks, Jana. Thank you for prompting that discussion, because you'll recall at December meeting of council last year, we briefed the council on the overall ranking strategy. There is now in the university a ranking strategy group. We meet frequently and we work with the academics across different areas, different component parts of the university faculties and disciplines. And we're working on the QS, the Times Higher Education and the Shanghai Jiatong rankings. That's the ARWU, the three that we want to bring into the top 100. We're obviously doing very well in the QS in a number of ways, both in the Future 17, where we remain, as you know, in the top 10, and in 68. In the Times High, changing that methodology. So it's as a result of a changed methodology that we've been able to push up in the QS. They're bringing in things like sustainability and a whole range of international outlook measures. We're watching the Times High one, and part of engagement with them through some of the summits that I attend and others attend is understanding how this is going to impact us. So we've got a meeting, I think, in 2 weeks with our ranking strategy group to look at the Times High methodology. Unfortunately for the Times High, they didn't actually tell people that they were changing the methodology this year. And so all of the Australian group of 8 universities went down. Many of, well, all of the New Zealand ones either stayed static or went down, and many of the ones on the continent too, in terms of Europe. So I think they need to do a bit better engagement. The other area we're looking at is with the ARWU, which is on our high size strategy, and looking to ensure that we retain and recruit really high quality researchers and research teams. And we've just been working through our strategic hire process and are able to start looking at clusters of people that we can bring in now to support the areas of strength we want to grow. And particularly doing this in order to make sure we don't lose the science base in New Zealand right now with some of the changes in other universities happening. So the rankings group is looking at that also. So taking the Stanford 2% top researcher list that's just been published and ensuring that we don't lose people who are on that list, and seeing where we have opportunities to ensure that New Zealand doesn't lose people on that list. So it's a multi-pronged approach. We'll bring the briefing to council in December, as usual, to show where we're going and what we've got in terms of resourcing that strategy.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments that people would like to make?
Yeah, I just have 2 quick questions, if that's all right, Dawn. The first one is just double checking. It says the completion of the Recreation Wellness Centre remains at June 2024. Is this still accurate, just because it contradicts somewhere else in the later papers?
Yeah. Well, this, of course, it's a moving feast, Harla, considering where we started with this during COVID, that we're probably talking about minimal changes to that timeline. I think we should be really thrilled. Adrian, what's the latest? Because I know Simon's been working on trying to get that pinned down.
Yes, Simon is concerned about June. We're certainly not. We haven't come to an agreement about additional days with the contractor as yet, but he does. He is concerned about perhaps a potential delay to August.
Yeah, I think that was in the capital expenditure minutes. Right. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. We're not clear about that yet, Harla, but I think we should anticipate a small delay.
Yep, understandable. And the second one is you mentioned the student protest. I was just wondering how the university is looking to respond to the students' concerns.
Yeah, and so you'll be aware, Harla, that we have. I have, and so has Adrian and Brendan, responded to the students' concerns and engaged quite extensively with the students in this regard. Adrian, I don't know if you want to make any comments in response to the communications, but also the meetings that we've been having.
Or briefly, we have responded in writing around costs for accommodation and reassured students that we are not looking to make a significant surplus from accommodation. Actually, breaking even is more of our goal. And also just provided a comparison about actually the costs at the University of Auckland accommodation, which are very competitive compared to other university providers in New Zealand. I think for catered accommodation, we might be almost the lowest priced provider in New Zealand, not by a lot, but lower, and certainly very competitive in the non-catered space.
Thanks, Adrian. And Hala, actually, you do give me the opportunity just to make a comment that it is unfortunate that the media decided to report that we were the highest cost in catered accommodation across New Zealand, when in fact we're not. And as Adrian's pointed out, it's the opposite. So, you know, we've managed to get that corrected, but it's a bit too late once it's been published. I have written to the media outlet concerned and expressed my concern that there was no fact checking with us in terms of understanding, you know, what was being said on that day and how it was portrayed to the media. I think it's really important to get those sorts of information pieces into the media so people understand how universities work and how we're funded and how students have to manage and maintain their costs. But I think it is important also to get the facts correct.
Yeah, I did read those media articles, so it's good that you touched on those. Thank you.
Okay. Kath.
Sorry, just picking up on another thing in relation to the accommodation. And wondering, some students came to us last week talking about the change in the residential advisor subsidy and the impact that that had on their ability to be residential advisors, and was wondering whether or not that was part of the protest as well.
No, it wasn't part of the protest, but I couldn't respond to it just now, Kath. I don't know enough about it to make a response. I don't know whether Adrian would, but it wasn't a big feature of the protest at all.
I think it hadn't been decided by the time of the protest. That's why it may not have been part of the protest, but I know that they've been very vocal about it. But I guess for context to everyone else, typically residential advisors who live on site with accommodation get a 25% off discount because part of the requirement of the job is they have to live on site. But next year they're looking at a 0% reduction, and that's where the conflict comes from.
Yeah, they 0% reduction, but then they're going to be paid in a different way. I think it's not like it's 25%'s gone and there's nothing, but I guess what you were saying to me the other day, Kath, is that they're actually not apples for apples. So it is going to make it more expensive for them.
Yeah, and some students raise concerns about particularly those who are not from backgrounds that can reasonably afford to live in Auckland, that would impact on their ability to provide service as residential advisors. That was a concern that was raised.
No, yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I think we are. It's a very complex employment environment, and so we've been following advice, working through how we provide on-call services, which we are likely to provide in a different way than we have in the past in terms of using residential assistance. So the services provided are likely to be different, and we will separate out payment for those services from charging for accommodation. So it's keeping those two transactions quite distinct.
Okay. All right, but obviously something that, along with the increase in accommodation, that the executive needs to keep an eye on. Okay. Anything else?
Sorry, it would be quite useful if we could have an update on that at the next meeting, just to understand that distinction that you've raised, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Anything from anybody else? Okay, well, just a couple of things from me just to really add on to what you've said, Dawn. I attended the Blues Awards. They were fabulous. It was a great evening. Just the range of things that our students are doing in the arts, or in the community, in innovation and in sport were just, they're always inspiring, and they were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And obviously with Matatini having been here, having been this year. There were a number of kapahaka performers that we were able to recognise, so that was fabulous. I think also you mentioned the new Po. I don't know if everybody's seen it. It's on the corner of Grafton Road and Simon Street. It's fabulous, and I think we should record our thanks to Scott and Vicky St John, who sponsored the creation of the Po. I think is probably the best way to express that, but absolutely fabulous. So, all right, with that, I will move that the report of the Vice-Chancellor be noted, and perhaps, Kath, I could have you second that. Good, thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to the reports of the Council committees in Part A, and the first report is from the Audit and Risk Committee. Unfortunately, we do not have the Chair of Audit and Risk with us. But obviously Adrian and Tim are here and I am here. We were all at that. So are there any questions around the minutes in Part A of the Audit and Risk Committee? Okay, rightio. I'm going to move that those minutes be received, and perhaps Jan, I'll ask you to second that since you were at the committee. Now I'll move to the Capital Expenditure Committee. Now you see the minutes there, and as Hala quite rightly pointed out, that's in Part B. So anyway, minutes, the Capital Expenditure Committee are there. Are there any questions on the Part A minutes? Nope. Okay, I'll move that they be received, and perhaps Kathy, I could have you second that since you were at the meeting. And then we have the terms of reference. Obviously, this is part of the annual review of the terms of reference of the Capital Expenditure Committee. Are there any questions around essentially there was really the changes really related to a change in titles, and then there were just a couple of typos that we fixed up. So are there any questions or concerns around those terms of reference? Okay, I'm going to move that they be adopted, and I'm going to ask Rob to second those. Good, okay. So now I'll move to the minutes of the Finance Committee. And the minutes of the Finance Committee are there. Was there anything that Rob or Tim that you wanted to point out relative to the minutes?
Well, certainly not the Part A minutes. Obviously, in Part B, we did discuss the student fee setting, and that paper's now in front of us.
Yeah, I think that is Part A. Anyway, that's right. It's all good. Yep.
Can I just say, Cecilia, I emailed, because I got the email here, Jackie, to say that to tender my apologies for that meeting, but it wasn't recorded. Sorry, I missed that when you went through it.
Okay. Yep. No.
I got Jackie's response.
That's the Finance Committee, John. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Adrian, if we could just Wendy, if we could just note that. Oh no, there is. Do you have you noted as an apology?
Okay.
Kathy Quinn, John Paitai, and Julia Arnott Nene were noted as apologies on page 38 of Diligent.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Nope, that's all good. That's all good. Good. Okay, we didn't, so I'm going to move that those minutes be received, and then we'll go on to the paper on the fees. Okay, so I'm going to move that they be received, and John, I'll ask you just a second.
Yep.
Those minutes.
Yep.
Okay. We then move to the report on domestic student fees. And obviously it's the report on the fees. Actually, I think that's incorrect. I see in my agenda, it says report on the fees 23 and the student fees 24. It should be 24 and 25 is what actually the paper is. And So we'll just note that for the minutes. Yeah, so this is the paper, and I'm going to invite, let's see, Dawn, whether you wanted to start by making a comment, and then obviously we have Tim and Adrian with us in respect of this document.
Just trying to get the page number up, sorry.
So page 41, this is page 41 of Diligent, the paper on the domestic student fees 2024 and international student fees 2025.
Sorry, my iPad is not taking me there.
Would you like me to kick
Do
off?
you want to start, Adrian?
Yes,
Sorry.
I'm happy to do that. So I'm happy to introduce the recommendations for fees, and I thought I could do this in kind of 4 parts. So we've got domestic fees, international fees, the compulsory student services fee, and university general fees. So moving first to domestic fees, in terms of the context and our regulatory environment, the university is regulated with respect to the amount of fees, the fee increase that we can apply for 2024, and the annual maximum fee movement for 2024 is 2.8%. We are recommending that domestic tuition fees are increased by the maximum of 2.8%, as this will enable us to address underlying cost movements. And in conjunction with the additional tuition subsidy that the government has announced for 2024, we'll also address some of the underfunding that we have been challenged with in 2023, and is certainly apparent across the sector, with many universities needing now to seriously address their cost base. The other aspects of domestic tuition fees, we need to separately set fees for micro-credentials. This is a very new area of provision for the university. We have only 3 approved micro-credentials where we receive a government subsidy for those, and we have 1 approved micro-credential where we can charge the market price. Our recommendation is that we charge the maximum allowable under the regulations for the micro-credentials where we receive a subsidy. We haven't had an increase since 2021, and we see this as important to keep pace with cost increases. And for the micro-credentials with no subsidy, we are recommending that this be delegated to the Vice-Chancellor to set a fee, and that we would then report this back to Council. I'll pause there in case there are any questions, or in case Dawn wants to make a comment.
No, I think you've jumped in at the right place, really, Adrian. I think, you know, in the preamble to the paper, Council can see some of the background context, which of course is changing constantly, but some of the context to the rationale for both the projected movements in the domestic and in the international. And I'm happy when we get to those points to answer any questions. But I think from the domestic student movement that we're just looking at the moment around the micro-credentials and the fee maxima, I think Adrian's pointed to that.
Yeah, and obviously there's a summary of the expected increase in costs and the necessity for increasing fees and that sort of thing on page 45 of Diligent.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't know whether Tim or Rob, whether you want to make any further comment on that, or whether we'll just open it up to questions specifically on the domestic fees. Rob?
Yes, I will make a few comments, and they're in the context of the forecast that we discussed in Part B of the Finance Committee, but fair to say the outlook is more subdued as we get more challenged with student numbers. And so I just don't think there's any choices here for us in respect of revenue, because we're going to be quite challenged in the coming years on costs as well. the forecast still shows a surplus, but it's clearly not in the levels that we were previously seeing. And we're still well below the 3%.
Right, that's right. The 3% that that the TUC requires that we operate at, and yeah, and that obviously that's the level that we have to keep working back towards. But as you say, very challenged, and you can see that in the minutes of the Finance Committee, because we've put into the minutes of the Finance Committee that the forecast performance summary for 2023 showing that reduction, reducing surplus, so to speak, compared to 2022 and 2021. Yeah. So are there any questions? As I say, there's good sort of summary on page 45 of Diligent on the domestic tuition fees. Are there any questions for Adrian, Dawn, Rob, or Tim, as in respect of the recommendation, which is we have the attached domestic fee schedule in the paper, but essentially the recommendation is that we increase domestic fees by 2.8%, which is the maximum allowed by the government.
Shall I move on to international fees?
Well, I think that I might. I'm just looking at this, whether I will do each of these separately. Okay, so I'm thinking what I'd like to do is I would like to move that we approve the attached domestic fee schedule for 2024. And if that could be, Rob, if I could ask you to second that. Thank you. And then we have, and obviously on that domestic fee schedule, I guess we have the micro-credentials that have got a set number that is regulated. And then we also, you raised this thing about the authorising the Vice-Chancellor to set fees for the non-government funded micro-credentials and those delivered offshore.
Yes, I think we've put that in a resolution coming up, because we combined it with a delegation for international as well.
Okay, rightio. Then I'll stop that then. And I'll let you go to international then, right? We'll just, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So with international fees, we are setting fees for 2025. And the recommendation is that for international tuition that we adopt a 4% increase. This is set somewhat below perhaps CPI, and there was some discussion earlier around whether in fact the increase should be for a greater amount. However, on discussion, our view from management is that we should be recommending 4% and increasing by that amount at this stage, as our markets are still quite variable. We are seeing different policies being implemented in different jurisdictions, and quite significant movements in international student kind of mobility and attractiveness of different countries. And we are currently taking a good look at our future strategy, and we'll be bringing back an international strategy for Council to review in 2024. So at this time, our recommendation is to keep the increase at the 4% level for tuition fees. I'll move to study abroad. Study abroad is a very different market. It's a one semester market that for this university generally relates to students from the US coming for one semester. It's particularly important for our Faculty of Arts, in that many of these students are coming from liberal arts colleges and are very keen to study various subjects in social sciences and humanities. It's also competitive on price, and we sort of bid for these agreements with study abroad partners and are bidding against Australian and New Zealand universities. I think we've shown where we sit in the midst of the other providers, and our view is that we should hold our fee for 2025 for this market. So we are recommending no increase to the study abroad fee. We then also set fees for our pathway partner. So we have subcontracted to Up Education the teaching of our foundation program. Up Education have proposed an increase of 4%, which we agree with and are recommending that we adopt that fee increase for Up. And English Language Academy, which is operated through Uni Services, is proposing several fee increases there, similar, around 4% overall, but it's 4% for one of the programs, 4.4 for another, and 3.3 for the last. Aligns with their market conditions and cost increases. So we're recommending that as well.
So that's on page 51, the pathway
Yes.
in the English Language Academy. You see the comparison for the study abroad on page 50, and then we've got the more about the international tuition fees starting on page 47. Everybody's just following that through the papers.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor. With a comparison on page 49, which I think is a really useful one to look at, particularly in the context of the question that Jan asked earlier about rankings, because if you look at the comparison with international tuition fees in New Zealand, really what we're missing is the fact that we are the research intensive university that's in the top 100 universities in the world. And of course, we're now at 68, not 87. And if you do that comparison across Australia, which is where we do most of our comparisons, and look at the fees there, then that's really where we were asking people to point their attention to.
And then the last part of the recommendations for Council to consider is where we are offering programs offshore. So this might be through T&E, that we seek a delegation for the Vice-Chancellor to set those fees, and they would be reported back to Council at the future meeting.
Okay.
So
Great.
should I pause?
I'd say pause there.
Yes.
Pause there, thank you. Are there any questions for Adrian around the international students or study abroad, or the funded and non-funded micro-credentials, and then the international online things? Jan?
Yeah, it's not really about the fees per se, but I note that the second partner for the foundation course is being terminated or not renewed. And I just wonder if it's sensible to explore whether or not we should have a new second partner to give a bit of tension and pricing and delivery, as opposed to just having one foundation partner.
That's interesting feedback. The International Office is looking at the entire strategy, and I'm sure they are looking at those pathway foundation programs as part of their strategy. They're very important for us, and I'm sure they'll be looking at whether we need other providers in the mix. Certainly important in which countries they also can operate and support us in terms of feeder students. So I'm sure you'll see commentary about that when the strategy comes through.
Great, thank you very much, Adrian. Okay, we've got any other questions? All right. If that's the case, no further questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that Council approve the attached international fee schedule, and that will be for 2025, and that will be the 4%, and then the no increase for the study abroad, and at the same time authorise the Vice-Chancellor to assign any new programs, including SAC-funded micro-credentials or programs becoming newly available, to international students in 2025 to an appropriate band to enable offers to be made during the recruitment cycle and report these decisions back to council. And then we can authorise the Vice-Chancellor to set fees for the non-government funded micro-credentials and for university programs delivered offshore, subject to such fees being reported to the council meeting immediately following. So I'm going to move those resolutions, and I'm going to ask Jan to second them, if you would, Jan. Thank you very much. All those in favour? I'm not sure if I don't recall if I said that all those in favour for the domestic fee schedule. If I could just make sure that I hadn't forgotten that, if all those in favour, just make sure that I have that. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, unanimous in both cases. Now we're on to the compulsory student services fee, and the paper in respect of this starts on page 52 of Diligent. And perhaps, Tim, this is something that, or Adrian or Tim, either of you like to speak to this?
I'm happy to introduce it, and then I'll pass it over to Tim to talk about this amazing graph that we have on page 52. So with the compulsory student services fee, we are operating in a different regulatory environment. So this the regulatory environment requires significant consultation with students about the fee, what we spend the fee on, and the preferences that students have. And you'll see in the papers some commentary around our approach this year to surveying students and also consulting with students. Students are generally supportive of continuing the services that we have on offer. And to do that, we see that we need to address significant cost increases in these services, which in some areas outstrip inflation. But our recommendation is that we increase the fee by 6% for 2024. And on page 52, we have shown some examples of the cost increases being incurred across some of the cost categories in the compulsory student services area. And before going back to Tim's graph, you can see on the next page, on page 53 of Diligent, a comparison of the compulsory student services fee that is charged at Auckland compared to other universities. To date, only two other universities have set their fee for 2024, but our proposed fee, as you can see, would be lower than both those universities at this current time. That's probably all I need to say right at the moment. I'll hand over to you, Tim, in terms of explaining the different cost trajectories there.
Thank you, Adrian. So the charts we're talking about on page 52 is indexed against 2021. So we're showing the relative movements in the compulsory student services fee across all the universities up to 23, and for the two that we know about for 24. And I think also, if we just bear in mind the table on page 53, which just shows the actual amounts of fees charged across the various universities from 2021 to date, just noting that Auckland is not the highest. There are three other universities currently that are charging more for this fee than us. And I think you can also see from the graph, if I return to that, that the increase between 23 and 2021 for the University of Auckland is actually the lowest across the piece, and quite considerably lower than some of the other universities. And this reflects the fact that in the last 2 years, we've made a decision to really keep the fee, and the increase rather to the fee, as minimal as possible, reflecting the disruption that student experiences during the COVID period, obviously with lockdowns and other disruptions. So, we made a deliberate decision in the last 2 years to do that. So I think we followed from memory the annual maximum fee movement in those 2 years, which was 1.7% and 2.75% in the last 2 years respectively. But as Adrian says, obviously our costs have shifted quite considerably, and we still need to acknowledge that. The inflationary environment, we're looking at probably a 4% inflationary environment for the next financial year. So that's the year we're talking about for the increase here, off the back of 6% plus, 7% plus last year and this year. But obviously there's been quite an impact to some of our costs that make up the services that this fee contributes to. And those are outlined also on page 52, so I won't necessarily go through all of those. But I think the chart there is really designed just to show quite visually and simply just how the University of Auckland fee has moved against the rest of the sector. So maybe I'll pause there for any questions.
Yeah, and there's quite a good then chart on page 53 showing what the expenditure is used for. I guess that's the 22 one, but at least it gives some sense of categories to us. Are there any questions or comments that people would like to make about the compulsory student services fee? There's obviously the proposal is that we a 6% increase to uplift it by 50 cents per point, or $60 for an equivalent full-time student.
I have a few comments and questions. I think I brought up quite a few concerns from the Finance Committee about the 6%, and I thought my understanding was that there would be another paper between then and Council for it to be approved, because I didn't think we had approved it at Finance Committee. However, I think a few of the things that I did come across is, like, for example, the chart on page 52, although it shows that Auckland is increasing the least, that's because at 2021 it had the highest student services fee, I believe. So although it's increasing the least amount, it's still like very high compared. And also it's kind of difficult to compare with other universities when the services provided aren't necessarily always the same. I think I gave the example that Otago provides like gym memberships as well as part of their student services fee, whereas Auckland does. So it's kind of difficult to provide that comparison. But yeah, I just think 6% is quite a lot compared to what we've seen in the past. And just wondering, the rationale, if we could lower it, how that would actually affect the university in that sense.
Yes, I think, hello, yeah, there was, we did talk about perhaps the paper going through the Finance Committee again. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to be done from a timing perspective. The committee doesn't approve it. The committee's just putting it up to the council for approval. But they have changed the way that that was presented to provide more information for everybody to view. But Tim, but the more important question, I think, Tim, is you to talk about, if it wasn't increased by that amount, what would the impact be?
I think it's a fair point in terms of where it's not an apples and apples comparison with the other universities. Obviously the framework that we will work within is dictated in the guidelines, but the way it's actually applied in each institution is slightly different. And I think if we weren't to increase by 6%, then obviously we're talking a component of our total revenue for the university, which we need to balance against the total costs that we're bearing. So it may seem small, but there would be implications in terms of looking at our budget setting next year in terms of any potential areas that we might need to then review the funding for.
Yeah, I think another one of my concerns with like the 6% is, for example, a lot of scholarships, they provide fees free for like specific papers or for a degree, but they don't cover the student services fee. So for the people who do attain scholarships, they still have to pay out this amount. And so that's one of my bigger reasons of why I think 6% is quite extensive. So it's more of how do we provide support for them?
I understand that, your concern from a student perspective. I guess when I look at it, I see on page 52 the significant increases that we're incurring. And it's really difficult, isn't it? Because of course we want to provide as much our services as cheaply as possible to students, but we also have sort of, as governors, have to act really responsibly. And you look at the trouble that the other universities, and a number of them have got into trouble by not sort of confronting the sort of the hard, nasty facts from time to time. So I guess for me, I really understand the issue, but I do think we have to pass on those increased costs that we're incurring.
If we were, can you just give us some understanding of what we're talking about in terms of, like, if we said if it was only being uplifted, I don't know if you can do this or not, by $50 instead of $60, what's that overall number? Do you have a sense of that, Tim, or is that just too difficult to do? Like what's the amount this raises? And let's say we 10% less was raised, what would be the number?
If I refer back to the the annual report for last year in 2022, it's about $28 million was the revenue that was attributed or collected from the compulsory student services fee.
Cecilia, to be honest, I don't think we should sort of horse trade about picking another number. I mean, I feel like we've got a recommendation here by a management team. And
I appreciate that, Kathy. I was just asking the question whether it was possible to understand what we're talking about, right? Just understand the relevance. Hala makes a good point about the scholarships. Perhaps that is something that if we pass this, that management could take away as an action to look at how that is dealt with.
Sorry to butt in again, but just another recommendation if this was to pass is, I think I mentioned it also in the finance committee, but letting the students know exactly where their money is going, because I think a lot of people don't actually understand what the student services fee does. And I know that the university has, they do try to market it as much as they can, but for example, when you're paying your students' fees, having sort of an icon that can take you to a link, I think something like that would be very useful, and that would just be a recommendation added on to what Cecilia just said.
Thanks, Hala. I might just, of course, all these suggestions are useful, but I might just say that, having spent quite a lot of time working with Valerie, who's not here today, Adrian and others, Anne-Marie and Brendan, on how we engage the students in understanding through their responses to us, how they would like the student services fee to be spent and on what, and the services that they value. I think we do try really hard to make sure that we're responding in that way. And it's useful to hear your comments because, of course, we don't always get sufficient responses from students. So I really appreciate what you're saying, but I think it's a very mixed bag in terms of those people who are really interested in that and those that actually aren't that interested and only see it after the fact, when in fact, of course, students have the opportunity to contribute to that decision.
Yeah, no, look, I think these are all good things for us to be thinking about. Is there any other questions or comments around this?
You can
sorry.
I just want to understand what we're agreeing on the scholarships issue.
No, we're not agreeing anything. I'm just saying that we're not recommending anything. I think we're not. There's no recommendations, no resolution before council or anything like that. I think we're just asking that that management take on board the comments that have been made.
Thanks, Chancellor.
Okay.
Sorry, just clarifying, because I noticed in the schedule that it's not it's a, what is it, a 6%, but it's not 8.88 for every student on every campus. That's correct, right? I just think got to make sure of that, because I see that on Taitonga it's 4.44.
Yes.
What is 44?
So
So just
it's a 50% charge for students who are online or at Taitonga or Taitokoro. So they can't access the physical services on campus, but they still have access to a number of services virtually.
Yeah, just clarifying that.
Yes.
Okay, so perhaps in that case, is there in the same way that we've referred to a schedule, that rather than approving it at $8.88 per point, we could, is it somewhere that's referenced? Adrian, you help me there? No, nowhere. Where did you get that from, Kath?
I think it's appendix something.
It is in the resolution, refers to the fee schedule A. So that does pick it up there.
Okay, but it says approve the compulsory student services fee at $8.88 per point and the associated changes, the fee schedule. It should probably be subject to the associated changes to the fee schedule. Yeah,
that would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That'd be helpful. Thank you, Kat. Is there any more questions or comments on this? Okay, well then I'm going to put the resolution that we approve the compulsory student services fee at $8.88 per point GST inclusive, subject to the associated changes to the fee schedule A, all student. And I'm going to ask Kathy to second that. And could I ask everybody to vote on that, please? Hello, would you like to have your your vote recorded as being against it or abstaining?
I'll abstain, please.
Okay, sure. Okay, but I think I saw everybody else was voting in favor. If anybody did not, just let me know. It's quite hard to keep it on everybody's screen. I apologize. Okay. All right, now we have the other fees schedule, which is
that's page 56 of diligent in terms of the commentary. So we are recommending that these fees remain unchanged with one exception. We are recommending for the removal of the fee to apply for a reconsideration of academic standing. And the rationale is set out in the paper, and that it is now being perceived as a barrier for students to apply. And given the low level of revenue that's generated from this fee, we feel that we'd be better off without it. So we're recommending that we remove that particular fee and all other fees remain as is.
Okay, any questions for Adrian around that? All right, if not, then I'm going to move that we approve the attached other fees schedule for 2024. And could I ask John to second that, please? Thank you. All those in favour? Okay, that looks like I've got everybody there. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, we're now going to move on to the report of Senate.
Thank you, Chancellor, and I'm going to hand over to Bridget very shortly. I just wanted to point to two things for Council's attention. The first is that you'll recall I initiated a review of Senate, which Penny Matthew, as the Dean of Law, has undertaken. She has been engaged in a survey, not just of Senate members, but also non-Senate members about engagement with Senate. We've had a very, very preliminary response to that. A look at the initial data suggests that there's been quite a poor response to the survey. And as you'll recall, one of the things I was interested in was really creating a much more engaged, dynamic Senate on academic matters for the university. We haven't yet received the full qualitative data at the UEC. Once that arrives, we'll have a look at it and understand what that means for us. And the second thing is just to remind Council that the work that Peter Hunter was leading on free speech, which has been going on for 3 years, we received recommendations at a previous Senate, and we've been working on the next phase of the work, which was agreed some time ago at Senate, which is to look at free speech alongside academic freedom and the code of conduct. And so the first piece of work will be undertaken quite soon around that, which will be looking at things like the collective instruments and issues that are arisen as part of contractual obligations and some of the work that's undertaken through our getting some legal advice on the issues related to the Act and statute, as well as thinking about how that aligns with the free speech and academic freedom instruments we've been looking at. So all underway. They're the big picture items. And then there are lots of other things that Bridget can speak to.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Bridget, over to you.
Laura, thank you, Chancellor. Hopefully brief for me now, because you'll be sick of listening to me. But the Senate, no, we had the usual, I actually wasn't at this Senate meeting because I was away, so Valerie very kindly wore multiple hats of being herself, myself and Dawn. But there was a couple of reviews to be approved, and then there was some academic matters and regulations. There's only really one in particular that I thought was noteworthy, which is Part A, Section 2, Item 2. And this is examination of subdoctoral postgraduate research components of 30 points and above procedures. And this is really some tidy ups and improving student experience that kind of completely, hopefully align with what I discussed earlier in the CFT overview. So it's some tidying up of some responsibilities. And one area in particular, so removing the requirement for an external examiner or assessor for projects less than 60 points. So this is something that is an administrative burden for faculties. It creates poor student experience. It's out of step with what other institutions do. They don't require this external person. Often the external person doesn't really understand research components of less than 60 points. And they can often quite harshly examine them. There's delays, plus we burden these people when really we want them to review examine our larger components. There's a new appeal clause in there because we've had a little bit of lack of clarity around how students appeal decisions. So that's been really useful to tidy that up. And then also a request for council to approve that the provost can approve subsequent future changes to the procedures under a delegated authority from council would be really fabulous, because obviously they're not major things to come to you, and they're usually sort of tidying up. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Bridget on any of the Senate papers, the Senate matters that have been put to us? One for you, Bridget, I see in around the update of examination of subdoctoral research components of 30 points and above procedures, and you've got the following changes: a change the approval process to allow the provost to approve subsequent future changes to the procedures under delegated authority from council, if approved by council. Do you think there should be some either, I don't know, report back on the use of that delegation, or report back, or have the provost notify, I think perhaps notify the vice chancellor when that delegation is used?
Yeah, so I do get a summary of when that's used.
Okay, good, thank you. Good to know. Are there any other questions on any of the Senate matters? All right. Then I will move that the recommendations in Part A of the report of Senate be adopted and Part C be noted. And I will ask Rob to second that. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you. Now, the next item is correspondence referred by the Chancellor. We have received a letter. Dawn mentioned a letter to her from the Free Speech Union. I also received a letter from the Free Speech Union. I actually have put that letter into Part B. I have now received a request from a student that letter go into Part A. It is in Part B. We can discuss when we get to the letter in Part B as to whether or not we wish to move it into Part A, which we would be able to do. But so that's just for it's understanding, right? Then other matters for decision or noting: the seal. We have the items that the seal has been placed on since the last meeting. I'm going to move, if there's no questions about those, I'm going to move that the affixing of the seal to the listed document be noted, and ask John to second that for me. All those in favour? Right. Then we have a rescindment where we've been asked by the Graduation Office to rescind the conferral of a Master of Engineering Studies degree that was awarded with no milestone and re-award it with the correct class of honours in accordance with the memorandum provided to us. So I'm just getting to that, the rescindment. Yeah, so this is on page 89 of Diligent. You'll see that there, going from no milestone to first class honours. So I'm going to move that Council rescind the conferral of the Master of Engineering Studies awarded with no milestone and re-award it with the correct class of honours in accordance with the memorandum. So that's from no milestone to first class honours. And Hala, could I ask you to second that? Thank you. All those in favour? Good, thank you. Okay. Now we have a note about the election of the student representative on council. About the decision has been, Adrian, I don't know if you wanted to just cover this. I mean, essentially it's in the agenda that we're rerunning the election because of certain procedural errors.
Yes, thank you, Chancellor. Unfortunately, we made some errors in running the election for student representative on council, and I have made the decision to rerun the election. We have called for notices of candidacy, which closed recently, and we will be on the 25th of October opening up for election again through to the 7th of November. It is very unfortunate that this has happened and is very disruptive for students. And of course, we're having to rerun the election at a time when students will be studying and for exams and into the exam period. So I do deeply regret that we've made that error and apologise to any of those who've been impacted by that.
All right. Are there any questions for Adrian? Okay, well then I'm just going to move that the returning officer's advice regarding the election of the student representative on council be noted, and I think that we should council should also note that we regret the disruption and inconvenience caused to candidates and student voters as a result of this. And I'm going to move that, and I'll ask Kath to second it. Thank you. All those in favour? I don't know. All right, now we come to the election of the Chancellor and the Pro-Chancellor. And as the Chancellor, I'm going to step down from the chair, and I think, Adrian, you're going to take the chair?
Yes.
For the first part for the election of the Chancellor.
So I'd like to call for nominations for the position of Chancellor.
I nominate Cecilia Tarrant.
Thank you. And is there a second? Thank you, John. Are there any other nominations for the position of Chancellor? Thank you. I therefore declare Cecilia Tarrant as the Chancellor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Adrian. I'm very pleased. So now we go to the election of Pro-Chancellor. and I'm resuming the chair, and I will call for nominations for the election of Pro-Chancellor.
I nominate Kathy.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to second that nomination. Kathy is happy to accept that nomination. Yes, thumbs up. Very good. All right. Are there any other nominations? No. If not, then I will declare Kathy elected as Pro-Chancellor. Right. Deputy Chairperson. Very good. Okay. Now, any general business? Is there anything that any of the members of council would like to raise as general business in part A? No? All right. Does anybody require a leave of absence for the 11th of December? No? Okay, all quiet. All right, then I'm going to move that the public be excluded from part B of the meeting. Given the general subject matter of each to be considered while the public's excluded, and the reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter and the specific grounds are as follows. There's the general subject matter to be considered, and then there is also the protection of the interests below, namely around protecting privacy, enabling the university to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, and to prevent disclosure or use of official information from proper gain or advantage. And that Adrian Cleland, Professors Linton and Bloomfield, Andrew Phipps, Tim Blewett, Simon Neal, Brian Tanak, Pamela Moss, Helen Catanach, Anthony Brandon, Matt Bowen, and Wendy Verscheren be permitted to remain for this part B of the meeting after the public has been excluded because of their knowledge of or need to be briefed about the matters to be discussed. This knowledge, which will be of assistance in relation to the matters to be discussed, is relevant to those matters because they relate to aspects of the administration of the University of Auckland for which those persons are responsible. So I'm going to move that, and I'm going to ask that Jan second that. Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Very good. Thank you very much. So we're now I'm going to close part A of the meeting.